Most students recognize the importance of interpreting biblical documents in their historical context. When you open the New Testament, everyone recognizes that you've left the 21st century and entered the 1st century AD, and that things are different. You are no longer in a Christian world, but in the world of Judaism with temple and synagogue and Torah and Jewish feasts and festivals and rules and regulations. The global superpower is not the United States or Russia or China, but Rome. Forget those things and you are likely to misunderstand and misinterpret the New Testament. But oftentimes students are not equally aware of the importance of interpreting biblical documents in their literary context. The New Testament is comprised of 27 documents, composed in several different literary forms or genres. In the New Testament, you have narratives, think stories, letters, think mail, paraenesis, think proverbs, and apocalyptic, think graphic novel. And everyone knows that you read these kinds of literature or genres differently. You expect different things from a story than you do a letter, and so forth. But because our Bibles have those pesky little numbers in the margins, chapters and verses, we are often tempted, even encouraged, to treat each verse in the Bible as though it were an isolated, independent little proverb or aphorism that can be extracted from its literary context and used in any way we like. Judge not, that you be not judged, which is one of the most misinterpreted and misused verses in the Bible, is a case in point. Just as with historical context, rip a passage from its literary context, and we run the very real risk of misunderstanding, misinterpreting, and misusing the Word of God. On the other hand, pay attention to the literary context of a passage and its place and role and function in the larger genre of the biblical book, and the passage comes alive in a way it otherwise could not. Let me give you one example. Gospels. Gospels are stories. And as with all stories, they have setting, scenes, plot, characters, and a message. Indeed, it has been recognized since the time of Aristotle's Poetics that we humans are hardwired, as it were, to expect stories to follow a predictable pattern. The hero is introduced who very quickly faces a conflict of some sort that launches a quest for something or someone to resolve the conflict, which in turn builds to a crisis and culminates in a resolution and a new beginning. Hear the pattern? Conflict, quest, crisis, resolution, new beginning. Sound familiar? It should. It's the pattern of virtually every story you hear. Take Star Wars, for example. The historical setting is fairly easy to identify, long ago in a galaxy far, far away. But unless you pay attention to the story's literary context, you might not be aware of the timeless narrative formula of which George Lucas is making use. Luke Skywalker innocently stumbles into a galactic conflict that launches him on a quest to find the princess for whom R2-D2's cryptic message was originally meant. The quest takes him into great peril, both physically and spiritually, until it culminates in a crisis moment with the Death Star. Luke rises to the challenge and flies his fighter into the teeth of the Death Star just before it fires its death ray. The resolution is achieved and a new beginning is launched. Cue the music. The Gospels follow the same basic narrative formula. Jesus faces conflict that launches him on a quest to fulfill God's plan for inaugurating God's kingdom, a quest that leads him to a crisis when Jesus enters Jerusalem and straight into the teeth of his enemies. His enemies ultimately arrest him, try him, and execute him. All seems lost until it is discovered that far from being an unfortunate failure, the cross was God's secret weapon all along. And instead of defeating Jesus, it actually empowered and enthroned him. The story's resolution is achieved in the resurrection, launching a new beginning and the next chapter of the story with Jesus' followers taking center stage in the sequel, the Acts of the Apostles. Now, I'm not saying that gospel writers just made this up and turned it into a story. On the contrary, I'm saying that gospel writers took fact and history and crafted it into a story they knew would connect with their audience. Because the pattern, the formula, was already there deep within them. What happened to Jesus was story. Indeed, it was the story. And the writers of the gospel told it as such. And so ignore the literary context and genre of the Gospels, and you are just as likely to misunderstand and misinterpret them as if you ignore the historical context. But on the other hand, pay attention to the genre, the plot, the scenes, and characters in the story, and notice particularly where your passage falls in that plot. And you are far more likely to interpret your passage correctly. That is, to get the message the original writer wanted you to get. And so when reading the New Testament, pay attention to the literary context of your passage and document, as well as its historical context. And you will be amazed at how much more there is to experience in the Scriptures that you, focusing on those pesky little numbers in the text, may have been missing. Till next time, take care. God bless.